Think back to when Ichigo emerged from the Dangai following his 3 months of training. He had that long, flowing hair and chains wrapped around his arm. While donning this new appearance, he casually caught Aizen's Zanpakuto with his bare hand like it was nothing. Dangai Ichigo wasn't just strong, he had completely transcended to a level where even Hokyoku enhanced Aizen was unable to sense his spiritual pressure. Just when you had thought you had seen enough, then came the finale Mugetsu. This attack turned the entire sky black. It was an ability so devastating that it momentarily put down the most dangerous villain in the history of Bleach. Ever since Mugetsu was revealed, I knew that this is an ability that Ichigo will never, and I mean never, use again. There's a lot more to this than just because, oh, he's gonna lose his powers, why would he use Mugetsu? While on the surface, this is true, the real reasons behind him not using Mugetsu run so much deeper. In this video, I'll be explaining everything from how Mugetsu had fundamentally altered the nature of Ichigo's powers, as well as what Mugetsu actually represents. So without further delay, let's dive into the topic of why Ichigo will never use Mugetsu again. Mugetsu isn't just some ultimate special attack that you pull out when things get rough. The Final Getsuga Tenshō is Ichigo literally becoming Getsuga itself. He isn't channeling it or firing it, but he is fusing with his Zanpakuto completely. His hair turns jet black, it grows down to the length of his waist, and these bandage-like wrappings cover his body. And then there's that smoky black Reiatsu that's constantly emanating from him. In that form, Ichigo is the attack itself. When he swings the blade of pure black spiritual energy and unleashes Mugetsu, which translates to moonless sky, he isn't just firing off a powerful beam. Ichigo here is expending every single drop of spiritual pressure, and unlike Uryu's Let Steel ability, which burned out his Reiatsu gathering abilities but left him with some residual spiritual pressure, Mugetsu burned through everything. Ichigo didn't just lose his Shinigami powers, he couldn't even see spirits anymore. His Reiatsu was so completely depleted that it took 1.5 years for even a tiny fraction of it to start regenerating naturally. That's how absolutely final Mugetsu is. Some fans note the parallels between Mugetsu and Let Steel understandably, and they jump to some conclusions, thinking that it must be a ability that's originated from Ichigo's Quincy heritage. But this is wrong, and we know this because of one crucial detail. It's that Isshin knew about the Final Getsuga Tenshō. When Ichigo was training in the Dangai, it was Isshin who told him about the Final Getsuga Tenshō, and he mentioned that his own Zanpakuto Engetsu had been reluctant to teach this ability to him. Isshin, a pure-blooded Shinigami from the Shiba clan with no link to the Quincy whatsoever aside from his wife, he had known about the Final Getsuga Tenshō. If this were a Quincy technique, how would Engetsu know about it? How would Isshin have any reference point for it? The answer is simple. The Final Getsuga Tenshō is a technique that's linked to the Shiba clan. Both Ichigo and Isshin can use Getsuga Tenshō, for example, and the only other person that we've seen use Getsuga Tenshō is Ginjo, but this is after he had stolen Ichigo's Fullbring powers. Both Isshin and Ichigo's Zanpakuto spirits are deeply opposed to teaching them the final version of the Getsuga Tenshō. That's not random. Their Zanpakuto spirits understand what this technique costs, and they don't want their wielders to sacrifice everything for it. Zangetsu literally tried to keep Ichigo from learning it by fighting him tooth and nail in his inner world. The only way that Ichigo learned it was by accepting Zangetsu's blade, by literally being impaled and understanding that his Zanpakuto was never trying to hurt him. His Zanpakuto spirit's true purpose was always to protect him. When we get to the 1000-year Blood War arc, we get the Blade is Me sequence, and this changes everything that we had known about Ichigo's powers. Old Man Zangetsu in actuality was a manifestation of Ichigo's Quincy powers. He had been suppressing his Shinigami and Hollow abilities for the entire duration of the series, so Ichigo was nerfed not having full access to his power pool. He was essentially fighting with one hand tied behind his back, accessing only a fraction of his power that Old Man Zangetsu was unable to hold back. When Ichigo had used Mugetsu against Aizen, he was burning through all of his accessible power, which is the fraction that Old Man Zangetsu had allowed him to tap into. So theoretically, the Mugetsu that Ichigo used against Aizen wasn't even Ichigo's full capacity, since again, most of his power was locked away by Old Man Zangetsu's restrictions. When Ichigo's Zanbakuto is broken during his encounter with Hashward and Yhwach, Ichigo has to go to the royal palace to have his Zanbakuto reforged by the creator of all Zanbakuto, Uetsu Nimaya. Nimaya forces Ichigo to confront the truth about his powers. While Ichigo's sword is being reforged, Old Man Zangetsu relinquishes his hold on his full potential. For the first time in his life, he has unrestricted access to everything. This is his Shinigami powers that he's inherited from his father, along with his inherited Hollow and Quincy abilities from his mother. There are no more suppressions, no more artificial limitations. When Nimaya is done reforging his Zanbakuto, Ichigo has a completely different power structure. The Ichigo who had used Mugetsu against Aizen and the Ichigo who faces off against Yhwach at the end of the Bleach manga are operating on very different scales. Ichigo now wielding dual blades, the larger one representing his Shinigami and Hollow powers, and the smaller one representing his Quincy powers. This is Ichigo accessing all of his powers in a fully balanced, integrated state. Yhwach himself states that true Shikai Ichigo possesses the same level of power that defeated Aizen. This is just in his true Shikai state, not even with Horn of Salvation. Ichigo equals the might of his Final Getsuga Tenshō form where he had used the Mugetsu, and he's maintaining this power constantly without any deterioration or time limit. He doesn't need to become Getsuga itself anymore because he's effectively at that level permanently now. This is important to understand why Mugetsu becomes irrelevant in the later stages of Bleach. The technique was designed to push Ichigo beyond his normal limits by sacrificing everything. But when your baseline power already equals your former ultimate form, then what's the point of using it? It's like asking why Goku doesn't use Kaioken times 20 when he has access to Super Saiyan 2, because his base form has evolved so far beyond where Kaioken was relevant that it doesn't add any meaningful power anymore. Then there is Ichigo's true Bankai, which Yhwach was so terrified of that he broke it in the future before Ichigo could even use it properly or show us what ability that it has. The leader of the Quincy had absorbed the Soul King and possessed the Almighty, the power to see and alter infinite futures. He looked at every possible timeline and said, nope, I have to destroy this Bankai right now. What does this tell you? Well, it reveals that true Bankai Ichigo represents a threat level that even Mugetsu is unable to match. Because remember, Mugetsu was powerful enough to temporarily stop Aizen, but Aizen was still evolving with the Hokyoku. He was still regenerating. It's still a problem that required Urahara's sealing Kido to fully contain. True Bankai Ichigo was apparently so overwhelmingly dangerous that Yhwach wouldn't even risk fighting against it. Then there's Ichigo's Horn of Salvation form. This transformation is where Ichigo tips the balance of his powers to bring forth his hollow side in a controlled manner. It's effectively Ichigo tapping into the power of that Vastolore form that he used against Ulquiorra, and he even showcases abilities in the Horn of Salvation form that Mugetsu never demonstrated, like the Gran Rei Sero Getsuga Tenshō. This hybrid technique wounded Soul King enhanced Yhwach. The Horn of Salvation form proves something critical. Ichigo has found ways to access transcendent levels of power without sacrificing his abilities permanently. He has learned to shift the balance of his powers in order to bring different aspects to the forefront when he needs them. This represents a mature, sustainable approach to combat that Mugetsu doesn't offer to him. Here's something that doesn't get discussed enough. If Ichigo used Mugetsu now, with him wielding the true version of Zangetsu, I don't think he'd just lose his powers temporarily. He'd likely lose them permanently. When he had used Mugetsu against Aizen, he was able to eventually regain his powers because he had massive reserves locked away by Old Man Zangetsu's suppression. The Fullbring arc as well as the Death Save the Strawberry light novel reveal how Rukia had a Zanpakuto created by Urahara, and she had the different Shinigami pour their Reiatsu into it, and this is the blade that she pierces Ichigo through in order to regain his Shinigami powers at the end of the Fullbring arc. So yeah, when Ichigo lost those powers, he really just was burning out whatever fraction he had access to at that moment. While the larger majority of his powers were dormant. But now Old Man Zangetsu isn't suppressing anything anymore. Ichigo has full unrestricted access to his entire power pool. If he used Mugetsu with his true Zangetsu, then he'd be burning through everything, not just 10%, but the complete 100%. The Mugetsu would also be 10 times larger than what we had seen against Aizen, and following it there'd be nothing left in Ichigo's reserves, no sealed away potential to tap into later. The Soul Society's Reishi Sword trick that restored his powers before, well, that worked because there was still something to jumpstart Ichigo's abilities. If you completely deplete a well that's already fully drawn from, you cannot refill it. So the risk versus reward of Mugetsu now has completely shifted. Against Aizen, Mugetsu was necessary because Ichigo genuinely didn't have any other option to put down the Hogyoku evolved Aizen who was transcendent to another level. But in the 1000-year Blood War arc and beyond, Ichigo has multiple forms and power states that provide comparable or superior power to Mugetsu without the catastrophic drawbacks. Why would he ever choose the nuclear option when he has sustainable alternatives? Mugetsu is a one-shot all or nothing attack. You transform, you swing once and you're done. It barely worked against Aizen, who was getting up and recovering until Urahara's Kido took effect. But against Yhwach, the man who can see infinite futures and rewrite reality to his advantage, the guy who literally resurrected himself by overwriting his own death, Mugetsu would be worthless. Yhwach would see it coming in a million different timelines, and simply alter the future where it never hits him, or he'd resurrect immediately after being struck. The Almighty completely counters Mugetsu's entire premise. Ichigo learnt this lesson. Raw power isn't enough against an opponent who can manipulate causality itself. You need sustained combat ability, adaptability, and the capacity to exploit windows of opportunity, like when Uryu's Still Silver Arrow temporarily disabled Yhwach's powers. And this was only possible thanks to the intervention of Aizen, who was using Kyokasuigetsu on Yhwach. Once Yhwach was temporarily powerless, Ichigo used his Bankai in order to strike Yhwach. But if he had already burned himself out with a failed attempt at Mugetsu earlier in the fight, then that critical opening that Uryu made would have been wasted. Learning Mugetsu required Ichigo to accept Zangetsu's blade, to be impaled by his own power and understand that they are one and the same. It was an act of trust and acceptance, but that same trust means respecting what Zangetsu wants, and that's for Ichigo to live, to maintain his powers, to not sacrifice everything. Using Mugetsu again would betray that bond. Ichigo, when he had acquired his true Zanpakuto, he had promised his Zanpakuto spirits that he understood them, that he accepted both the Quincy and the Hollow side as parts of himself, and that he would no longer ask either of them for help. Part of this acceptance means not throwing away what they've worked so hard to give him. His true Zangetsu represents the culmination of all of his powers working in harmony. Destroying that harmony by using Mugetsu would be a fundamental rejection of everything that he has learned during his journey across the story of Bleach. From a storytelling perspective, Mugetsu represents a specific moment in Ichigo's character arc, the willingness to sacrifice everything to protect others. At the time, it was beautiful, tragic, and necessary at that point in the story, but Bleach's later arcs are about Ichigo learning that he doesn't have to sacrifice everything. He can be strong without destroying or hurting himself. He can protect people without losing his power, and it's okay for him to rely on others for help. The entire 1000-year Blood War arc is about Ichigo embracing all aspects of himself, not rejecting parts or burning through everything, but integrating it all into a sustainable whole. True Zangetsu, his jewel-bladed Zanpakuto, isn't about sacrifice, it's about acceptance. Asking Ichigo to use Mugetsu again would be asking him to regress as a character, to go back to the mindset of I'll give up everything if it means winning. But Ichigo, honestly, he's grown past that. He's learned that he can be strong and keep his powers at the same time. He can protect people and live to fight another day, and that's the whole point of his evolution beyond the Mugetsu technique. Mugetsu was perfect for the moment that it appeared in. It was a desperate gambit by a young man who didn't fully understand his own power. He was fighting an enemy that seemed to be unstoppable, but that moment has passed. The Ichigo who faces off against Yhwach, who's unlocked his true Zangetsu, who mastered the balance between all of his inherited powers, that Ichigo doesn't need Mugetsu anymore. Hopefully this video has helped you to understand why why he's never going to use that technique again. And if there is anything that I've forgotten to mention about the Mugetsu, then let me know by continuing the discussion in the comments. And lastly, thank you so much for making it to the end of this video, and I cannot wait to see you in my next one.
A massive thank you goes out to all of my amazing Patreon supporters for helping to make this video possible. If you also want to support the channel and see your name in the end of my videos, then check out my Patreon, which has loads of perks like early video access and so much more. Thank you for sticking around till the end of the video, and whatever you contribute will mean a lot to me.